The birds were not visiting the garden, they were building it, and one woman spent 5 years trying to make the world understand that.
In the spring of 2018, a wildlife botanist named Dr. Sarah Chen was doing what she had done 100 times before. She was conducting a routine garden survey in a quiet suburb of Columbus, Ohio. Walking slowly, taking notes, photographing plants, nothing unusual until she saw the flower. It was small, pale yellow, growing in the far corner of an ordinary backyard, between a fence post and an old stone wall. Sarah stared at it for a long time. Then she opened her field guide and confirmed what she already knew, but couldn't quite believe. That flower was native to the rainforests of Central America. It had no business being in Ohio. It could not have been planted there. The homeowner had never traveled to Central America. There was no nursery within 300 miles that sold this species. There was no rational explanation for how a seed from a tropical rainforest ended up in this particular corner of this particular backyard. None, except one. What Sarah discovered in that moment and spent the next 5 years proving would change how scientists understand the relationship between birds and the natural world. It would also cost her nearly everything, but we'll get to that. Who is Dr. Sarah Chen? To understand why Sarah's discovery mattered and why nobody wanted to believe it, you need to understand where she was in her career when she made it. Sarah Chen had spent 11 years at Midland University studying one specific question: how do plants spread beyond their natural range? It sounds like a small question. It is not. The movement of plant species, where they grow, how they migrate, why they appear in places they shouldn't, determines the shape of every ecosystem on Earth. Get it wrong, and conservation efforts fail. Invasive species go unchecked. Native habitats collapse. Sarah believed birds were the missing variable. Not wind, not water, not human activity. Birds. She didn't stop. For 11 years, Sarah had been the quietest voice in a crowded room. Underfunded, overlooked. Publishing in small journals that nobody read, presenting at conferences where people checked their phones during her talks. She had the kind of career where you start to wonder, very privately, whether you were wrong about everything. And then, on a Tuesday morning in Ohio, she found a tropical flower growing between a fence post and a stone wall, and she started to think that maybe, just maybe, she had been right all along. To understand what Sarah was uncovering, we need to talk about what birds are actually doing when they visit a garden, because most of us think we know. A bird comes to eat, it finds a berry or a seed or an insect. It eats it. It flies away. Simple. But here's what actually happens. And it is anything but simple. When a bird eats a berry, the seed inside that berry passes through its digestive system and is deposited, intact, viable, and wrapped in a natural fertilizer, wherever the bird happens to land next. This is called endozookery, and scientists have known about it for decades. What Sarah was proposing was something far more radical. She wasn't just saying birds spread seeds accidentally. She was saying birds make choices. Deliberate, specific, intelligent choices about where to deposit which seeds. She had data showing that certain bird species consistently deposited seeds of specific plant types in locations that matched the ideal growing conditions for those plants. The right soil acidity, the right light exposure, the right moisture level. Not sometimes, consistently. A robin doesn't drop a berry seed in the shade if that plant needs full sun. It drops it in the sun, over and over, across thousands of documented observations. Sarah's question was, how does the robin know? The answer, she believed, had to do with something that most biologists had dismissed as too complex to be true. Birds have a working knowledge of plant ecology, not in a conscious human sense, but encoded in their behavior over millions of years of co-evolution. Birds and plants have developed a partnership so deep, so precise, and so mutually beneficial that calling it accidental is like calling architecture accidental. The garden is not just visited by birds, the garden is, in a very real sense, built by them. 3 months after the Ohio flower, Sarah was back in her lab. She had submitted a research proposal based on her findings. The university committee had rejected it in 11 days. A record, someone told her, not kindly. She was sitting at her desk on a gray Wednesday morning, staring at her data and wondering if her department head had been right, when a crow landed on the outside of her window. She didn't think much of it at first, but the crow came back the next morning. Same time, same window, and the morning after that. By the end of the second week, Sarah had started noting it in her research journal, not as data, just as a curious observation. She labeled it Crow 7 because it was the 7th individual bird she was tracking in her current study. What happened over the following weeks became one of the most documented human-bird interactions in her university's research history. Crow 7 began appearing not just at the window, but at Sarah's car, in the parking lot, on the roof of her specific vehicle when she arrived in the morning. It had learned her car, it had learned her jacket. On days she wore her Greenfield jacket, Crow 7 would land closer. On days she came in casual clothes, heading to meetings, not fieldwork, the Crow kept its distance as if it had assessed that today was not a fieldwork day. It had learned her schedule. On days she had afternoon lectures, she left her lab at 1:45 p.m. Crow 7 began arriving at her window around 1:30 p.m. on those days, as if coming to see her before she left. But the morning that made Sarah stop and sit down very quietly was the morning Crow 7 brought a seed. A single seed, placed deliberately on the windowsill and left there. Sarah had it analyzed. It was a seed from a flowering plant species native to a region 340 miles north of the university, a plant that had no documented presence anywhere near Columbus. The Crow had carried it from somewhere far away and left it for her. In November of that year, Sarah presented her accumulated findings at the Regional Botanical Research Conference. She had spent 3 months preparing. She had 847 individual data points. She had the Ohio flower. She had Crow 7 seed. She had flight path correlations across 4 different urban ecosystems, all showing the same pattern. She stood at that podium and she told the truth as clearly as she knew how. The response was not what she had hoped for. A senior professor, 30 years in the field, 3 published books, endowed chair had raised his hand before she had finished and said, with the particular cruelty of someone who believes they are being kind, "Dr. Chen, birds don't plan. They're animals. What you are describing is either coincidence, confirmation bias, or both." Several people in the audience smiled. Someone near the back laughed, briefly, then covered it. She finished her presentation. She answered 3 questions politely. She packed her notes into her bag, walked out of the conference room, and sat on a bench outside in the November cold for 45 minutes. She went back to her lab the next morning. Crow 7 was on the windowsill. She sat down. She opened her notebook. She started collecting. In the second year of her research, Sarah found what she would later describe as the most important piece of evidence she had ever. It was not a flower. It was the absence of flowers. She had been given access to a long-term ecological study of an urban lot in Detroit, a former community garden that had been abandoned 12 years earlier when a construction project drove away the surrounding residents. The study contained botanical surveys going back 20 years, detailed records of every plant species present year by year. Sarah spent 2 weeks analyzing those records. Then she drove to Detroit and walked through the lot herself. What she found was not wilderness reclaiming its space, which is what usually happens to abandoned urban land. What she found was silence. 23 plant species that had been documented in that garden before the construction, native wildflowers, fruiting shrubs, pollinator plants, were gone. Completely gone. Not struggling, not diminished, gone. And no birds. The construction had disrupted the bird population of that area for years. Noise, habitat destruction, human traffic. The birds had left, and when they left, the garden had slowly, quietly, stopped being what it was. The weeds had come in as weeds do. But the wildflowers, the ones that needed birds to carry their seeds, to choose their locations, to maintain the invisible gardening work that most humans never see or so, those flowers had simply ceased to exist. Without the birds, the garden forgot what it was supposed to be. She submitted a new paper to 3 journals that year. All 3 rejected it. She submitted to a 4th and waited. The email came on a Thursday morning in March. It was from a producer at BBC Wildlife. They had read her 4th submission, the one still under review, through a contact at the journal. They wanted to know if she would be willing to demonstrate her findings on camera. Sarah read the email 3 times. Then she walked to her window. Crow 7 was not there that morning. It was early spring, and the crow had been less regular in recent weeks, but the windowsill was not empty. There was a small piece of dried moss on the ledge. She had noticed it 2 days ago and hadn't moved it. She picked it up, turned it over in her fingers. Then she went back to her desk and replied to the email. The BBC crew came to Columbus in May. Sarah took them to 4 sites she had been monitoring. She explained what they were looking for. She set up cameras. She waited. On the first day, nothing remarkable. On the second day, at the 3rd site, a walled garden in a quiet neighborhood, a robin arrived at 9:17 in the morning, landed in a specific bed of loose soil near the south-facing wall, and deposited a seed. Sarah pointed to the spot on her predictive map, the one she had made 3 weeks earlier based on her data, and showed the camera crew. The robin had landed within 4 inches of her prediction. The BBC producer looked at the map, looked at the bird, looked at Sarah. The BBC documentary aired 14 months later. A clip from it, 32 seconds of Sarah pointing to her map, The robin landing, the producer's face, was posted to social media by a wildlife account. It reached 40 million views in 11 days. Sarah's fourth paper, still under review when the BBC found her, was accepted for publication 2 weeks after the clip went viral. The journal expedited it. The professor who had laughed at the conference cited her work in his next book. He did not email her to mention it. She found out from a colleague. She doesn't talk about that much. What Sarah Chen discovered, or rather, what she spent 5 years insisting was true until the world caught up, is something that changes how you look at every garden, every park, every patch of green in your neighborhood. Those flowers did not arrive by accident. Something carried them. Something chose the location. Something has been quietly, patiently, faithfully maintaining the natural world around you. Not because it was told to, not because it was paid to, but because that is what it does. The birds are not visitors to your garden. They are the architects of it, and they have been working on it with extraordinary care and impossible precision since long before you arrived. The garden was never random. It was always a conversation. We just forgot how to listen. Next time you walk through your garden, or any garden, look at the flowers that seem to have grown in exactly the right place, in exactly the right light, in exactly the right soil, and ask yourself, did that happen by accident? Or did something bring it there, carefully, deliberately, knowing exactly what it was doing? The answer has been growing in your backyard this whole time. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who loves their garden. And subscribe, because next time we follow another thread from Dr. Sarah's research into somewhere even more surprising.